criminal hackers in a tech noir metropolis, simulated memories, ghosts in cybernetic bodies, a government agency crime procedural laced with existential questions, a mastermind called the Puppet Master. The net is vast and infinite.
I love movies. I love cinema, all genres, foreign films, and it's rare that I come to something late without a. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you can have certain ideas of what a thing is and a complete misunderstanding of what the art is capable of. With Japanese anime, with the exception of Akira, which I saw probably over a decade ago, and Patch of Blue that we talked about many months ago,
Perfect.
and Perfect Blue, I apologize, and Perfect Blue, which we saw a few months ago and discussed. And there was a problematic handling of that material on my part. I think you can be, in a weird way, shackled by your understanding of a genre. At this point, I've seen a lot of anime, but I've seen children's anime. I've seen Miyazaki, which is vastly different than the films that we're going to be the film we're going to be talking about today, and I anticipate films that we're going to be talking about in the future. This is very grown up material. This is very much material that is adult oriented in a way that you need to have an understanding of the world and both cultural history, relationships, and the darkness of humanity to embrace the storytelling. I'll readily admit, between you and me, watching this film, I saw it for the first time Tuesday night. Here we are recording on Thursday. I did not understand the film. I had an overall understanding of the arc of what was being said. Artificial intelligence, a kind of Blade Runner-esque story that expanded on a lot of the themes of that movie, but did it in such a way that was in a medium that was completely foreign to what I was used to or even capable of understanding at the time. I watched it again on Wednesday night, understood it a little bit better, and I can still say that there's a great deal about it that I'm missing, but I'm captivated. I'm watching this film, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of there's something about it that resonates within me from a movie watcher standpoint. There is a great deal that I'm missing, and yet I want to understand it. I want to understand it better. I want it to make more sense, because whatever failing is happening during this experience is almost solely as a result of my unfamiliarity with the genre and its capabilities. We started to record and I had to stop, but I started to talk to you about those pixelated paintings from the late 90s, early 2000s, where if you stood back far enough and you looked and you focused on one spot, slowly an image would appear. And sometimes an image would never appear. But if you concentrated, you would see a sailboat, you would see a home, you would see something. And that's a very simplistic comparison of Japanese anime, but it's the best way that I can describe my experience watching this particular movie. There's something in it that is forcing my hand, is forcing me to go back to it and want to know more. And I'm both excited and intimidated by the potential of that. That being said, I'm really interested in your take on both the material as it exists within its own framework of Ghost in the Shell, but also in relationship to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, Cameron's The Terminator, Alex Garland's Ex Machina, and any other artificial intelligence themed entertainment that we've experienced up to this point. So I'm interested in where the talk's going to take us. So please let me know your reaction.
Well, a really good friend of mine, basically a brother, we go back decades. He's been into anime as far back as I can remember. I've probably talked about this in some level before. Robotech. This is the 80s. So it was Macross, Robotech, that world. So it was three of us, three friends, and we grew up together, and it was like one was, and this is a super oversimplification, but just to paint this picture for everyone, one was he was into, like, when growing up through our adolescence and everything, into martial arts, into anime, into building models. My other friend, video games, and those two would, like, basically vibe on that, like video games, anime, movies, different things along those lines. That other friend who was into video games was also into music, so he and I would vibe on, like, music. But then my anime friend, he and I would vibe on, like, we would go bike riding, and the three of us would hang out, but also, like, we could hang out, just two of us, and have those connections. And I'm sure a lot of you have that, where it's like, obviously, whatever you have in common with certain friends, you key into that, and maybe one friend, it's like, oh, that's my fucking, that's my ramen friend. We go and eat ramen, and that's our thing. Even though we're friends on other levels, like, that's our fucking super thing. And then, my other friend, that's my hockey friend. Like, we both like hockey. These other two people, this guy doesn't like ramen, but whatever. Kind of like that. So I grew up adjacent to this type of shit. I grew up Akira all the time. It would be like, or Akira. It would be that, Faces of Death. As a teenager, like, all this shit. Recently, we went camping, the three of us, and we were, like, playing music that we used to listen to, talking about. I started asking him about, like, different anime, or Vampire Hunter D was another one that I saw. So my shit is, like you, is limited because it's not something that I keyed into. It was something that I was aware of, but I never kind of, like, it never bit me. I wasn't like, oh shit. It was like, all right, this is cool. But for whatever reason, I just didn't dive into that. And slowly we've been kind of stepping in on some degree. There are some listeners and members and contributors who have, like, made some suggestions and gotten us Perfect Blue. That was Burroughs. He got us, like, to that, and it was seeing kind of like some influences on Christopher Nolan, some influences on Aronofsky, um, things like that that are getting us deeper and deeper. And now I'm kind of like, ooh, this is. I had seen this months ago, and I had been waiting to like bring it up, and then I was watching it again this week for this, and I can see some Nolan in here. I can see how this could have inspired some of his like questions, his philosophical questions, some of his approaches. Even before we get into that, and before we get into the relationship between Blade Runner, which is my favorite film, and some of these other Ex Machina, which we just talked about, if you're not into anime, but you're a film person, or you think you're a film person, or you say you're a film person, there may be this bias where you make this distinction between a film and a cartoon. Because you may have, I mean, this is kind of like exposure, this is training, this is culture, this is just, and I don't just mean culture in terms of, as you, I don't know if you said it during this version of the recording or don't we have to stop, but it was, I'm having false memories. Where do they come from?
It's not real. None of it's real.
Exactly. I don't mean culture in terms of like, oh, Japanese versus American versus. I mean, that's built into that because of the medium. But I mean, in terms of like the culture of being exposed to certain genres, getting tastes, developing a taste for something, whether that's music or cinema or genre, subgenre, whatever. If you're not familiar with the culture of anime, of this type of cinema, you may not even think of it as cinema. You may still have this thing of like, oh, well, I used to remember, to me, cartoons means when you were a kid, you wake up on Saturday in the mornings, especially on Saturday morning, and you watch animated drawings directed at children. And maybe you have nostalgic things of fucking, if you're old enough, like fucking Looney Tunes or fucking Smurfs or fucking, in the 80s, and Smurfs were fucking satanic somehow, and or Thundercats or something like that. You know what I mean? Whatever it was, G.I. Joe, whatever. You sit down to watch something like this, Ghost in the Shell, 1995, and you're going, this is a film. This is a film, but it's fucking animated. And it's not an animated film like a Disney animated film, which is essentially a musical, that's animated. This is like, for example, this is a type of procedural mixed with sci-fi, mixed with philosophy. And I mean, and really getting into it, like sci-fi itself as a genre is very much lends itself to philosophical questions to begin with, because it ponders the uncertain, ponders the state of the world, not only in the present but in the future, reflecting back and commenting on the present. A friend of mine he's contributed. Thanks again. You know who you are. He is now beginning to really get into more and more film. And so I was like, I'm like, a lot of this shit just comes from fucking Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and then go to the Universal film. We talked about this. We're going to continue to talk about this. That idea of creating life. Now we get into whether it's Ex Machina, which that's an android, so it's a machine that looks like a human. So it's a robot. But it looks like a human. Blade Runner, same. Terminator, so Schwarzenegger's Terminator character is also that, but his flesh, the skin on top, the muscles, well, I don't know about the muscles, I know because he has like a, anyway, the point is that it's actual skin, it's actual like harvested or grown like flesh, so there is a mixture there between actual flesh, organic material, and machine. So that's a cybernetic organism. It's a cyborg. The android, typically in these films, questions its existence if it becomes aware of itself as if it has AI, if it exists and it thinks it exists, then at some point it typically realizes, hey, I'm an android. Or if it already always knew that it was an android, it's like, hey, this is fucked up. I'm basically a slave to humans. Why? What's my relationship to humans? Cyborgs, like with this film, it's basically the relationship beyond that to the relationship of consciousness and existence. It's like the relationship of consciousness, but also mixed in is the relationship of machine and flesh. So am I an organism or am I a machine? Well, you're both. So the premise of this story, Ghost in the Shell, is that you have a female cyborg agent who works for this agency, this government agency in this fictional city, Newport City, and it's called, she works for Section 9, and they work in cybercrime, and she's after this hacker. He's a hacker known as the Puppet Master, and he hacks into people's ghosts or their cybernetic brains, because in this future world, you have this merging of machine and human. And so it becomes like a RoboCop type of thing where if you get, let's say you get into a fucking accident, now your body is going to start to become augmented by machinery in order to keep you alive.
That's one of her
the
partners.
question in those circumstances.
Point, yeah.
I'm sorry?
That's one of her partners. Her main partner is basically a RoboCop. He's
right.
I mean, but he's a human, but he's been
a version
real
of that too.
What's that?
Huh?
You were saying what was that?
I said she is also a version of that.
Yeah, but I got the impression that she was the idea that she is a fully robotic creature and it was never really clear. I wasn't really sure. This is what fascinates me about it, because I keep asking questions of like the murkiness of the plot, and it doesn't go out of its way to make it clear, is she a full-on robot with a human soul that has been, because that's kind of the impression that I got. Whereas her partner was like a soldier, was a man who was slowly, let's say you lose a foot, you lose an arm, and you get rebuilt slowly like RoboCop. you know?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, let me keep working through basically if people aren't familiar with the
Go
story,
ahead.
what it's about. So
Yeah.
she's this, so Major Kusangi is this woman, young, agent for Section 9 who she is at least in part cyborg. We're not sure exactly. Let's say we're not sure what she is. Let's just go with that because it's going to lead into where she herself is going. She's in pursuit of a hacker who hacks into people's cybernetic brains. And the deeper she goes into her investigation and into the pursuit of this hacker, the more she starts to look at her own life, her own existence, and to question her role in the world, her place in the world. She's having like this crisis. And so eventually in the story, the puppet master is revealed to be not just a hacker, but he's a consciousness. So he's this AI that's basically born on the net as a part of this this covert project. And Project 2501, not Project 2025. That's a different dystopian sci-fi documentary that we're in.
Let's be very clear about that.
Project,
yeah.
This is Project 2501. So this hacker consciousness, he hacks into a Section 6 covert robot. So it's already kind of like confusing. But within this world, there are different government agencies, and they work independently of one another, and they don't. So therefore, they don't know what is happening, and so a lot of times they interfere with each other in terms of their functioning. So this consciousness hacks into this robot, and ultimately, the puppet master consciousness wants to simulate life. And he's chosen this agent. It's not super clear, but perhaps because of, or he's influenced her kind of musings about her existence. So he's like drawn to her or whatever. And so he wants to merge consciousnesses with her in order to create a new consciousness or something like that, which will be in the simulation of life, that would be like them like mating, and then he would die, and her current version would die, but what would remain would be a new version of her, and that would be like his that would be like his offspring. And so to him, he wants to simulate that like life cycle, because that's ultimately as human as you get. As human as you get is to merge with someone and then die, or to reproduce with someone and then die, however you want to look at it. And so he ultimately merges with her, and she gets damaged in a shootout. And this is so fucking spoiler alert. This shit's from the fucking 90s. And she ends up in a younger body with basically an open future. So it's got a lot of exposition because there's a lot of talk between characters about like, oh well, this happened and this happened. And typically I hate that. But it still leaves like gaps to where it's not necessarily like explaining shit to you in a way that could be done through the action of the script or the story or the plot. It's giving you, part of it is because they're trying to figure things out themselves. So they're telling, the characters are like, oh well, this happened, because they're trying to work out their investigation over who this hacker is. So within this procedural investigation agent, government agent hacker story, you have these deeper questions. And ultimately the questioning of reality. You have questions of how can one prove one's own existence? I mean, this is like The Matrix. This is a lot of sci-fi. How do you know that your memories are your own? Blade Runner.
It's like, do androids dream of electric sheep?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't even really think about that title. The title says a lot about the very idea of what it's of what the story is. Do androids, robots, a scientifically created being dream of electric sheep the way we count sheep in our sleep? You know, this human equation to elevating something like that to, I don't know, in a weird way, it's kind of egotistical in saying that to make it on par with us is to make it fulfilled. And that's one of the steps that a lot of these films take in the dangers of the plot lines. When a scientific creation becomes self-aware, it will ultimately become both self-serving, self-preserving, and jealous. But this film didn't do that. This film seemed like the AI was searching for purpose, not in a way to necessarily destroy humanity, the human race, but to fulfill its own purpose. And I think that was the part that confused me, not because it's a confusing idea, but because I had never seen anything like that presented on screen before in a story like this. I don't know if you took that. I don't even know if I'm explaining myself correctly. I don't even know if I was right to interrupt you the way I did, but that's just, I had to interject before I lost that train of thought, you know?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, yeah, because then it gets in, and my friend who we were talking about Frankenstein and all that, like the other day we were talking about, even like we touched on speciesism, which is a lot of times that's the reaction if you say, well, we need to watch out with fucking the potentials of AI and robotics, and it's kind of like, then it become, the counter to that is like, you're fucking guilty of speciesism, which is to say that you are elevating humanity above, for example, let's say an android. Like, how dare you? Because at that point it becomes a form of discrimination. And
well, I think you can make a better argument by saying elevating it above, you know, if you want to talk about speciesism, wouldn't you go with an animal? And probably either your two most intelligent animals, whales and dolphins, or elephants, where studies will show that there are communal and cultural practices within herds.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and everyone's like all about that fucking. Everyone's all about that video of. Recently, there was an earthquake in San Diego.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's this video of the elephants at, I don't know if it was the safari park or the zoo, but it was one of those animal parks in San Diego where they form a circle around the youngest elephants. Yeah, and they have like defensive practices and they do their thing. I mean, I'm not, the reason I don't bring up animals is because now you're just bringing up a third thing. I'm talking specifically, like, already the assumption is that human beings, for the most part, see themselves above other animals.
Well, that's what I was talking about. Where but elevating those animals and creatures because they practice behaviors that we attribute to ourselves. That's egotistical. And I'm not trying to be a bleeding heart and say, oh, animals are people. What I'm saying is there was a limiting idea and view that those behaviors are somehow grander and a product of greater intelligence because we can see them in ourselves.
Sure, in the same way that you can say, well, if you look at history and people say, well, some people make the argument that you say, well, look at these civilizations, these non-Western civilizations, and we use the argument that, let's say in Mesoamerica, you have these pre-Columbian, meaning pre-contact with Europeans, pre-Columbus. You have these civilizations. We say, look at the cities, look at the pyramids, look at the astronomy, look at the whatever scientific breakthroughs that they had. Look at this, look at that. You say that about the Great Pyramids of Egypt. You say that about now the counter to that is like, okay, you're just using a westernized version of civilization to try to justify the so-called civilization of these places, these cultures, but that still now excludes the cultures that didn't. If you didn't have a big ass fucking city, which is civilization like that, with big ass structures, what you're primitive, but only if you had these cities where you advanced, or you know what I mean. So it becomes yes, we already practice these forms of like these biases, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, but I don't want to bring in animals because we're talking about already. If humans have a version of speciesism that elevates themselves above animals, the only reason, like, we can exclude that from what we're saying. We're talking about humans versus androids, who would have a potential consciousness or intelligence that would either mimic or rival human, or ultimately surpass it. Then that's what I'm talking about, where it's like, well, now there's discrimination against these other beings because it opens up a question of what is personhood, because ultimately these Frankenstein monsters or creatures, or that in itself would be a slur against an android. They open up the idea as to what is a person, because an android ultimately would try to assert itself as a person and say, I have fucking rights because I'm a person. I may not be human, but I would have the analog to human rights because I'm a person. Because then you would say, well, what makes a person? Well, what makes a person is a person has an identity. They have thoughts. They're able to articulate their thoughts. They're able to say, I exist. They're able to, and the android says, oh, I can do all of that. Right? And so that gets into now the philosophical side of it. And then if you flip that and say, well, from the android side, it's like the android is basically becoming more and more human, the robot becoming more and more human through its experience and its intellect, or its consciousness, right? For the cyborg, it's the human becoming more machine. So it's going in the opposite direction, because the android is like hardware, with the software is becoming more human. The cyborg is the human being's hardware is becoming more machine, because if you lose an arm, well, now you have a robotic arm. So then it becomes a question of like, now it's not necessarily the android becoming more and more human. It's like, does it gain human rights? But then, okay, what about the human? The human started out as human, but now is, if your body is completely cybernetic, if your body is like, let's say you have a machine, totally machine body, but only your brain and your brain stem is organic, are you still human? You know, the mind body connection, right? These are these questions. These are these potentially unanswerable questions. And is it going to be that in some future Sweden or whatever, it's going to be like, well, any consciousness itself will be personhood, versus this future dictatorship of whatever, or the US, where it's like, nope, only fucking only white humans, only white male humans are human. Then it's like, okay. And then in some other country, it's like, well, the standard is you must be deemed 85% human in order to be considered human. And then it's like, well, at that point, you know, like, if you're, do you not get that arm? Because even though you're missing a human arm, by not adding the robotic arm, it still raises the percentage. So it's kind of like, are people going to be making those decisions in order to retain their fucking human rights and not get bumped into another level of like some stratified like caste system in society? The all this shit goes back to the idea of this mechanistic dualism between the mind and the body. It's in this film, in Ghost in the Shell, goes back to this idea of ghost in the machine. This philosopher named Riles, he did a critique of Descartes. So Descartes is, I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Which goes back to Plato, the world of forms, the spirit versus the body. There's a dualism that goes back that far. And then, but Descartes is the one that's like codifying it that way, where it's the body is basically like a machine. And in that sense, you have like the idea like physics is coming, like all of these things are coming into, they're being articulated so that you have a Newtonian universe where the universe is like a machine. You have a Cartesian view of the mind versus the body. The body is like a machine. And still our idea today of the body versus the mind, we still have that concept in large part. Obviously, we understand that there is an interaction between the mind and the body, but for the most part, I think a lot of people just walk around with the idea that, well, whether it's in a religious sense, it's like, well, my soul is who I am, and my body is just going to die, and then I'm just going to continue. There's that. Either way, there's this kind of tension between like the mind and the body. And when you think of yourself, yeah, obviously, like you're looking in the mirror and you're like, yeah, that's me. But we think of ourselves as more than our body, because our body is fucking dying. And as we get older, we're like, God damn, like, that used to be me. This cannot be me. In large part. So you have this idea of like the mind precedes the essence. But you had, in terms of going deeper into that chain of ideas, you had the existentialists, you had Sartre saying, well, essence precedes existence. You have I'm sorry, existence. So you're just thrown into you exist. Then it's what you do with it that creates your essence. So it's existence proceeding, and then now what do you make of these choices that you have in your life? Or phenomenologically, Husserl, the experience itself. How do you experience the world as a subject with a consciousness? Now, do androids dream of electric? Philip K. Dick, his ideas, which are big time influential in terms of cinema. Blade Runner. What's that other one with Schwarzenegger?
Total Recall.
Total Recall.
Scanner Darkly.
Scanner Darkly. Minority Report. Exactly. So Philip K. Dick's writings, very, very influential in terms of like ideas that have filtered their way into popular culture or at least entertainment. But these ideas, and then you have counters to this Cartesian like mind body duality. This thing of having this. Basically, it's a ghost in a shell, or a ghost in a machine. Spinoza, you have monism, which is everything is an emanation of the mind or of God or of nature, whatever, however you want to describe it. So both the mind and the body are just two versions of this same kind of emanation coming out of this greater thing. Or a lot of times what we have now is pure materialism, which is there is no such thing as mind. I mean, there is mind, but mind is just a product of the brain. So there isn't necessarily the same duality between mind and body. There is only, everything is physical. And so your mind is a product of electrical and chemical functions in your brain, activity in your brain. Your brain is your mind. If your brain is damaged, your mind is damaged. If something's fucked up in there, chemical imbalance, whatever, that affects your mind. When you die, all of that activity is gone and you're dead. And that's it. And then you're going to just decompose and that's it. Everything that happens can be attributed to something physical, meaning not just like an actual object, but I mean like physical forces within the universe, gravity, blah, blah. That's it. Now, this fucking AI in this movie is like, like I came to be in the fucking web, you know? Like, yeah, there are wires, but like, what happens in between the wires? What happens in between the airwaves? What, you know, in the kind of like the cyber ether? Like, what is that? There's more than meets the cybernetic eye. You know what I mean? Like, so this thing basically wants love. And it's searching in all the wrong places until it finds this agent, and it's like, listen, girl, like, we gotta merge so that I can die, and then you can basically die, and then we can have our consciousness offspring as another version of you in a different body eventually. Are you down? You know what I mean? Like, and she's down, basically. It's crazy. But it makes sense.
Well, from the sense of giving a being consciousness and self-awareness, it would make sense that it would, number one, fight for its own survival, but also number two, fight for its own purpose. And I think that was the part of the film that I was expecting a far more bleak dystopian future dystopian future setting in which a creation maybe had gotten out of control. But that's not what I got. I read this film as a creation that became self-aware and was being seen as a threat, as a possible threat, without putting up the action of being a real threat. The puppet master is not a villain in this film. It's the puppet master is portrayed and is sold as a villain in the beginning, but by the end you realize no, that's not the case here. This is
I mean,
empathy...
in order to achieve its ends, it is hacking into fucking people, and it is fucking like it's fucking with people's memories, and it is getting people killed because it's manipulating others. So it is acting against the best interests of other people. So it's not like this completely benevolent fucking like nobody gets hurt crime, like victimless crime type of thing. Like
No.
it's doing what
there's a lot of gray in this film, and it's not a black and white kind of good versus evil, and I think that's what sets it apart. I think that's both what makes it difficult for audiences, but also what attracts cult audiences to this film. And because this was not a big hit in Japan when it was released, it became a cult film over there as well. And then when it was released over here, it was embraced as a type of I guess a film that really understood people's victimization by the state, by the 1984 idea that we're all basically just cogs in the machinery. That we're all Metropolis moving the hands of that clock until it becomes so much that we collapse out of both exhaustion and desperation. There's a fight the power kind of rage against the machine sensibility of this film, and the story is told in such a way as we embrace the underdog of the cyborg, the robot. One of the things that was kind of difficult for me to understand, and I think we talked a little bit about this in another film. Well, we talked about it in Clockwork Orange, where there wasn't the clearest picture of the society around the main character. So in this film, I'm wondering how much of society is partly robotic versus how many natural human beings exist. It was very murky. I didn't know. I didn't have a good handle on what the world was.
And it would be, I think, murky.
Yeah. But it did not bother me the way it did with Clockwork Orange. Maybe because that was a little bit more that was more of a human story, and a film that really challenged our own lizard brain attraction to violence. That's not what this movie is. There are definite ideas being played out, and there are definite ideas of purpose, that if you have empathy, and I think empathy is probably the most important thing that you can have in watching a movie, you can really sink into both the story that is being told and the participants in that story. So I loved the partners. I loved this robotic female soldier, major, who was contemplating her own self-identity and purpose, and there was a lot going on there. And I just thought it was a film that really swung for the fences and took a lot of chances, because this is not the type of film, this is not the type of story that people flock to. I think it's asking too much of its audience, or it's asking too much of a mainstream audience to really embrace. But for those who are willing to search it out and find it, it's a level of reward that is incomparable. It's not incomparable, but it's a level of reward that is very rarely experienced in movies. I mean, how many times do you watch a movie that makes you really question the meaning of life? Because that's basically what is here. I found it fascinating, and I thought this, science fiction gives you the distance from a story that I think is sometimes necessary in order to raise the grander questions. And that's what this film is doing. I don't know if you could do this film with in a modern setting. I think it worked for Ex Machina as well, because it was 10 minutes into the future, but an isolated way over there. Oh, that's what's going on in those compounds.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of like sets up the challenge for me is because it's all about these dichotomies, all about these dualities, like between we talked about speciesism. Well, we touched on it. We talked about the idea of like a cartoon for kids versus the cartoon for adults. Film, like live action film versus anime. And now, and I joked about it. I was like, all right, 10 a.m. We're gonna fucking do this. The anime, not the live action. And you're like, fuck you. Like, who the fuck would have thought about doing the live action? But now that we're talking about it, I fucking want to do the live action because I want to, not because I'm sadomasochistic, but because I want to really go back to back and say, what's a perfect example of how you can have something like this in a different, it's film, but in a different genre, or at least in a different sub-medium, I guess you would call it, of film, versus the live action, and how is it done within anime, in Japanese, with those sensibilities from the 90s versus something fucking completely Hollywoodized, with Scarlett Johansson completely, like, potentially opening itself up to the criticism of being whitewashed, etc. And I want to get at, or I want to try to arrive at something which is closer to what does anime do that live action Hollywood fit doesn't do. I mean, obviously you can say, well, we talked about this with Perfect Blue. By drawing things, you were able to achieve different levels of like movement of the characters, blah blah, like that. That's like, we know that. But I'm talking about things that are deeper that we may not even like register yet. I want to try to achieve that. So I'm challenging us both. The number one challenge is like, okay, let's get deeper and deeper into anime and really expose ourselves to that and kind of like learn about that subgenre and learn about what are the like the cultural languages of anime in terms of like how does an anime story How do you tell anime stories? How is that typically, and how do people challenge? You know, once you get a tradition, you're going to get someone else who's going to try to revolutionize it and be like, well, up until this point, anime was done this way until this genius came in and was like, look, I respect what came before, but fuck you, I'm going to do it this way. And it has its own history like anything else. I want to get into all that to a degree. I mean, I don't want to become a fucking like necessary expert on anime, but I want to familiarize myself and immerse. Then the second challenge, that's the first challenge. Then the second challenge is, are you willing? I think I'm willing to do it. I saw the trailer and I was like, I can tolerate this, and I want to see if it has any redeemable shit to it. To sit through 90 minutes, let's say, of potentially something that's not going to be something that we're going to like, because we're going to be talking shit the whole time that we're seeing, and you're going to be cussing me out in your head. For the purposes of achieving like a part two of this conversation, but now looking at how did they fuck this up, or how did they adapt it in a way that like are the limitations just based on, well, you shouldn't have even adapted it because you're stupid, or is it like
no, the film could be adapted. I mean, if look at how beautiful Blade Runner is, and then look at how beautiful Blade Runner 2049 is.
That's true.
I mean, you can do it. It can be done. But as with both films, they're going to fail miserably at the box office. It was years before Blade Runner found an audience and recouped what it was. Blade Runner 2049 is, I don't think, as good a film, but it is incredible in its own regard. And I think may one day garner the attention that it deserves. However, with something like this material by a major studio and possibly a director that doesn't have the foundation and the power within Hollywood to dictate how a story should be told, they're going to fuck it up by making it into something. First of all, make it into something that it's not, and focusing on the lizard brain aspects of what is attractive to a lot of people. It's like, you remember when we talked about Face Off?
Yeah.
As enjoyable as that film is, and I find it very enjoyable, we talked about how it's not good. It's not a good film because what makes John Woo such an incredible filmmaker is the beauty of the violence, but in contrast and played off of the relationship and the brotherhood of characters.
Right.
Where it makes sense in Hong Kong, it loses that in an American setting because we, as an audience, are not capable of going to those places with it. So,
right.
So you know that's I think that's our limitation. Part, yeah. So with Ghost in the Shell, I can already tell you, and I'll watch it. I'll fucking watch it. But I can almost guarantee that it's going to go to the very base. It's going to go to the very base presentation of Scarlett Johansson with her tits popping out of a latex suit, running and being shot at, and a lot of, acrobatic gun fu kind of play. And it's not going to have the heart, it's not going to have the attitude, it's not going to have the warning and the ideas that are present in this film. Maybe they could have done it in Japan, but they won't be able to do it here. Because I don't think there's a studio that could have made this film. Not as a live action, maybe if the technology were available in the 70s and for a window in the 70s, maybe 4 years during the 70s, you could have made something like this and gone in that direction. But you would have needed a Fincher or a Nolan to pull it off, even in the 90s. I just don't think American studios would allow something like this to be realized. They don't have the faith in the audiences, but I also don't think the audiences have the capacity to take it in. Not on a level that would justify the budget necessary to realize it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think on a certain at a certain level, it's like imagine this for an idiocracy audience.
Yeah.
Where they're gonna be like, "What is this? Some fact shit?"
Yeah. Still one of my favorite lines. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's like a live action with less humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A live action with less life. Versus something that's animated that has more life. I want to try this. I want to see, and I very much agree with what you're saying. But I want to. I think the easy part is going to be looking at the live action film and saying what's missing from that. I want to do the math and see, by seeing what's missing from the live action, what is not only present but what is added to this film by looking at the deficiencies of the other one.
It's an interesting idea, and it's one that it's as far as a cinematic experiment, an analytical experiment. It's worth looking at. It is. I would agree that it. I'm open to it. But it would also be interesting to look at it from the perspective of, do you respect? I mean, it really depends on who the director is. And Scarlett Johansson has done things that I liked. I liked Lost in Translation. I think there's a couple other things that I've liked her in, but it's just not. I would have to go into it. I would have to force myself to level the expectations and look at it with an open mind, because it would be pointless to go in there and just say, well, this is going to fucking suck anyway. Let me just look at the ways to shit on it. That's not fair.
I mean, I think we already are doing that. Yeah, we have to counter it in our own minds.
But we're not really doing it. We're speculating on what we would do. So, given the opportunity, and we've talked about this in the past. I've told you, if a film is being made by a major Hollywood studio, most likely there is something in it that you could possibly mine and find redeemable, and not even redeemable, but also exemplary. Like there might be a performance, there might be set design, there might be a certain level of cinematography, all at the service of polishing a turd. And I can't imagine that it's anything but that. But by watching it, I would, it would be one of these situations where be open-minded enough to see what does work about it, and not allowing the obvious shit to color your view of it. So in essence, not allowing the cynicism to take over in the viewing experience, which takes actual effort.
It does. It does. I looked up the guy. His name is Rupert Sanders. He did Snow White and the Huntsman.
Mm-hmm.
He did Ghost in the Shell. Right, and then he did The Crow 2024.
That's not a
which
good
I have not seen. but and again, like I'm not this big fucking advocate of The Crow. And I know you thought it might have been more influential to me than it was, but I do remember like it was a thing where it was like, oh, let's go see it, like because it was out at that time. And I saw the trailer for this new one, and I was like, this movie fucking fuck this movie. It was just one of those things where it was just kind of like, and I don't know if it's a nostalgia thing because we've done an episode on The Crow since, and I mean it's a time and place, you know what I mean, and it's a certain.
It kind of sounds to me like being in love with a girl and then seeing the guy she's fucking, and it's like, really, bitch, really.
Maybe, maybe it's but from fucking like 30 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what all of that means in terms of my own psychology and my own aging fucking process, but like, but the fact that he did Snow White and the Huntsman, and I did see that, and I very much told myself I wasn't going to watch the new Crow, which I mean, maybe eventually, similarly, I may just to be like, wow. But already that gives me that adds to your sentiment that it's going to take a lot of effort to not go into it with, and maybe I shouldn't have even said anything, but I did. Maybe I shouldn't have looked it up, but I did. So now I'm already like, yeah. But it's like mentioning Total Recall. I saw the remake, and not that I think the first one is amazing, but the first one, like, again, time and place. There's something to it that's like, it's Schwarzenegger in that fucking era. There's something to it that it's like, all right, like, it has its qualities of being a sci-fi film with Schwarzenegger at that period, and that in and of itself lends something to it. It lends a certain era to it. It lends a certain vibe to it, which the remake, I don't know if it was. It could have been made last year. It could have been made in the year 2001. It could have been made in 2014, 2007, 2005, 2009. There's no difference to me. So it's not. Doesn't even have that, like. It doesn't even have a particular temporal kind of like feel to it. But there were times when I was like, oh, like I like the way that they made that room look. So yeah, sometimes it's fucking just set design that you're just like, okay, that's cool. Was it worth it watching that film just to see that room? No. But the room was cool, if I remember correctly. You know?
No, absolutely. And sometimes that's all you're gonna get.
Sometimes all you're gonna get is a cool room and Scarlett Johansson in a fucking suit or whatever, flipping. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. And that may be the case, but as a compare and contrast, I'm like in this film there were certain like I think there were two like city montage kind of, and they're not like they're not going over wide areas of the city. They're just kind of like certain sections, and it reminded me of do you remember Solaris from Tarkovsky, where before it gets into the space station there's like a brief scene where they're driving and it looks like this fucking like freeway, and it's like bluish purple, and it just looks.
Yeah, I remember now.
It just has a vibe to it. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It reminded me of that when I saw these city montages with this music, and there's like nothing happening except you're just kind of looking at parts of the city, and I was just kind of like, this is a fucking vibe. Like this is it reminds me of and I don't even remember the name of this guy. He's he's a photographer that took photos of Hong Kong and
Holy
Japan.
shit! Are you fucking kidding me?
What?
I was thinking about that last night. There was a Hong Kong. They were rediscovered 1940s and 1950s Hong Kong black and white photography, and it made it look like this weird noirish. It was beautiful black and white, very film noir like photographs. Is that what you're talking about?
I've seen those, but I'm talking about another guy too.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Who he probably no. I mean, like it's all part of the same shit. And I'm looking through this book because I know this fucking William Gibson, who's the sci-fi cyberpunk guy. He wrote this book where he talks about this. He names this fucking. I have the internet right in front of me, but I'm fucking leafing through this fucking book trying to find this thing.
It's old school, baby.
That's how I am. Because I don't know, like, anyway, the point is that it's this photographer that took photos of he went to East Asia, there's different countries, and he took photos, and he captured like a lot of the nightlife. Some are in black and white, but I don't know if it's the same person. But is it Greg Girard? Anyway, he took photos of these like buildings, and it just gives it like this vibe where you're just kind of like, I don't know if I want to live there, but I'd be down to fucking go eat or go live, or like pass through, or kind of when you see Hong Kong fucking Fallen Angels, or Chungking Express, or that cinematography, like Christopher Doyle, fucking shit like that. And just those montages made me like, I was like, I've got to get more into anime. I've got to do that.
Well, we're gonna have to on that. That's a call out because we have to. We don't know. All I know is Miyazaki, and maybe Cowboy Bebop, but that's a different kind of vibe than this, which I want to get into. Cornelius Burroughs did send me. He sent me the series once many years ago, and I have it. I've started it, but I've never committed myself to the time needed to do something like that. But I think if Perfect Blue, Akira, and this film exists, Ghost in the Shell, I can't imagine that there are a shitload of films that are on those three levels. But I think that there are probably films that approach that dynamic and intent. And I'd be willing to go on that journey with you and discuss it on these episodes, because I think there was something I wanted to suggest to you anyway about diving into films that we have never seen, neither you or I have ever seen, but that have these weird little reputations. We're going to talk a little bit about that off mic, but anime would certainly be a wide open genre to dive into in that respect, because
for sure,
yeah, you don't know, and I don't know, so I mean it's worth it.
The guy's name is Greg Girard. That is his name. Okay. But yes, no, I'm definitely. It's when you are experiencing like what you think of as like a cultural desert in cinema, not as a place, but as a time. Um, like we are in a cultural, I guess you would call it a cultural drought, you know?
Have been.
The thing is that like, yes, we are, but again, like there's shit that fucking like is happening that we don't know about because we're in our fucking box. But, to be able to branch out into other time periods, like, cause this is a 1995 film.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? And there's shit going back into the 80s and that, you know, we're not familiar with. That's like, these are places that we need to cover, places we need to go, and things that are still relevant, things that are still timeless,
Yeah.
things that are still politically, existentially, humanly, humanistically relevant and vital to our day-to-day lives. Not just, oh, I'm gonna get home from work, crack a beer, and fucking watch a film, which is fucking like also yes, you know, like do that and fucking hang out with your person or your friends or your people or your tribe or whatever the fuck, or your dog or your cat or your fucking plant or your dick or whatever you're gonna do and watch that fucking whatever it is you're gonna watch. And at the end of the day, it's like, for us, I mean, I'm sure I'm speaking for us, but for me, and then hopefully I'm sure for you and for those of you who are listening, cinema to us is not just, and I've said this before, it's not just to distract from like scrolling, like when you're doing that, but to enhance your life, to enrich your fucking life, because we don't have life extension fucking technology right now. We don't have when we give up our ghost, whatever happens, happens. And the most we can do is try to fucking connect consciousnesses with other people, whether that's through, like, Rick, you and I, we're fucking talking, we're doing this, and then we're connecting our ideas, our views, our experiences to those who are listening, like that. We can do that. The same thing that these artists and sometimes hacks and versions of like artistic Hollywood prostitutes. No offense to regular prostitutes.
Yeah.
As they convey their shit to us through these products, it's like we have products, we have artifact, we have works of art, we have products, we have propaganda, we have distractions, we have advertisements. Which is which? That's the murky part. Is like figuring out for you what you determine is each one. That's the exploration. That's the investigation. That's the experience. That's what we do, and hopefully that's what you do. And we all do it separately, but together in our own fucking weird way. Buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. Buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. This one goes out to Slim Slim. Thank you. Thank all of you, and we'll see you in the future next week.